This is section 4.5, and in section 4.5 we're going to be solving quadratics by factoring. Now, essentially, this is the exact same thing as what we did before, except now we are solving a quadratic equation in this case. And so in this case now, what we are going to be doing is the quadratic equation, and we're going to take that ax squared plus bx plus c that we've seen before. We factored it before, but now we're going to throw in an equal sign. Okay, and in this video, it's always going to be where your quadratic is going to be equal to 0. All right, so the biggest part here that we're going to look at is standard form. So it's standard form of a quadratic equation, and we know this because we've seen this: ax squared plus bx plus c, and it equals 0. So the difference is before we just had an expression and we factored it and we're done. Now we're actually solving for a variable. We're going to get an x by itself. We're going to get a y by itself. Things like that. Okay? So how do we solve quadratic equation by factoring? First, biggest step here is we got to make sure everything is equal to 0. Ideally, we would like the right side to be 0 and the expression on the left side. But it's not always necessarily going to work out that way for you. Okay, but ideally we got to get one side equal to 0 and everything else to one side. Then we're going to factor the expression on the left side, just like we did in the last section, where we're going to take a times c, put our x down, a times c on top, b goes on the bottom, and factor from there accordingly. Then, once we get done, we're going to have two sets of parentheses, just like before, and we're going to set both or all factors equal to 0 and solve each equation. You will end up with two answers on all of your problems that we're looking at here. Okay, so let's dive into the first examples here. All right, so the first thing I've got to check in problem number 1 is the equation set equal to 0? So is there a 0 on one side of the equal sign? Yes, there is. Okay, so since this is equal to 0 already, this is going to make life a lot easier. What I'm going to do first here now is identify what's A, what's B, and what's C. So A in this case is 1, B is -5, and C is +6. Okay, and I'm going to do the exact same thing we just got done doing. None of this is going to be any different. So I'm going to take A times C, that's 6. So I need factors that multiply to be 6, and they add to be -5. Okay. So when I look at that, I'm looking at numbers that multiply to be 6 that add to be -5, and my two numbers are -3 and -2. Okay. So what I'm going to do here now is replace this with -3x minus 2x, bring down the +6 and bring down the equals 0, and bring down the x squared. And now I'm going to factor by grouping. So the same concept here. Group the first two, group the last two. None of this is any different from what we just did before. Okay, take out an x here. I'm going to leave an x minus 3. Biggest number that goes into 2 and 6 is 2. So I'm going to take out a -2 there. And I'm going to leave an x. And +6 divided by -2 is -3. Carry down my equals 0. What do they have in common? They have an x minus 3 in common. They have an x minus 2 outside the parentheses, and that's going to equal 0. So up until this point, it's all been the same. Nothing's changed in how we factored. This is where things are going to be a little bit different. I have to take each one of these sets of parentheses, set them equal to 0. So x minus 3 is going to be equal to 0, and x minus 2 is going to be equal to 0. And now I solve. To solve for x, I add 3. So in this case, x is going to equal 3 if I add 3 to each side. Down here, if I add 2 to each side, then x is going to equal 2. So my two answers are x equals +3 and x equals +2. Those are my two solutions to the problem. Okay, let's take a look here at this next example. Again, first thing I always want to check, Is it equal to 0? In this case, it is. So, first thing I want to do is identify A, B, and C. In this case, A again is going to be 1, B is 7, C is 12. So I need to find A times C, that's 12. Factors of 12 that multiply to be 12 that add to be 7. In this case, those two numbers are 4 and 3. So I'm going to take and replace with 4x and 3x. Bring down everything else. Okay? Group the first two and group the last two. Again, make sure you have the equal 0 at the end there. Take out an x here in the first group, left with an x plus 4. Biggest number that goes into 3 and 12 is 3. And if I take out that 3, I've got an x left. 12 divided by 3 is 4. And now they have an x plus 4 in common. X plus 3 is outside the parentheses. All right. So from that point on, from that point before, none of this is new. It's the same stuff. Now I'm going to take each set of parentheses, set it equal to 0. And when I do that, I subtract 4 here. X is going to equal -4. And I subtract 3 here. And x is going to equal -3. So in this case, my two answers are -4 and -3. Okay, now you should be able to complete the first page of problems on Class Kick.